Hello, everyone. This debate took place approximately 3 months ago, and out of courtesy, I had been attempting to allow Mr. Hovind to post it to his channel before mirroring it on mine. However, it seems Mr. Hovind is unwilling to share this discussion with his viewers. Therefore, I have decided to go ahead and mirror the actual conversation from the great debate community. Again, I'd like to stop there and thank Steve and everyone who participated to make this possible. So without further ado, this is the uncut, unedited version of the entire discussion / debate where me and Mr. Hovind hope to determine which methodology, Christianity or secularism, would allow for a better moral decision-making model. But interestingly, the conversation spills over into education and his lack thereof. He at one point even admits that he in no way, shape, or form has ever worked as a teacher in any real sense of the word. This part of the conversation, along with a few others, are somewhat telling about Mr. Hovind's background and his, let's say, ethics, and therefore I feel that's the reason he's reluctant to share this on his own channel. I want to make it clear I'm not here to claim victory or in any way try to make it seem as though I am claiming God does not exist. As always, I'm here to find truth, not truth. I hope you find this useful and entertaining. I would also welcome any critiques, criticisms that you would like to post below. Thanks again for watching, and enjoy.
Hey, I'd like to welcome everybody to this debate tonight. We've got Kent Hovind, which is going to debate negation of P on the question of what provides the best methodology for moral making decisions, atheism or Christianity. It's going to be more of a free flow rather than a structured debate. There's going to be a 5-minute opener from each of the debaters. There's going to be a back and forth between them for about an hour, and then we're going to try to get some Q&A from the people watching. So I'm going to start it right off with negation. We're going to call him Ned for the practical purposes for the debate. He's going to start for the 5-minute opener, and then Kent's going to have equal time to say his opener. Go ahead, Ned.
Okay. Hey, everybody. First, I want to thank Mr. Hovind and Steve for the time and effort that you guys have been putting into this. I've been a big fan of Steve. What have you been doing for a long time on all this? And, you know, the debate so far, especially with Mr. Hovind, has been really, really good. So I'm honored to be here tonight, and hopefully I can bring something interesting to the table, if not entertaining at least. For those of you that who know me, I'm going to be a little redundant here because I say this at the beginning of every debate, but I just want to make it clear for those who don't. I honestly believe, I hope I lose the debate tonight. I honestly hope I do that. The reason I say this is because I feel if everything I present tonight is proven to be correct, outside of the useless bragging rights, I didn't get anything from this discussion. But if I'm proven wrong and I'm brave enough and have the intellectual honesty to incorporate that newfound knowledge, then I got a chance to grow as a person and hopefully become better than I was before this conversation. Next, I want to make this clear, and I know this is going to be controversial, so please listen. I want to make it clear I will not be challenging Mr. Hovind's religious beliefs tonight. In fact, I'm going to go out of my way for the sake of the argument to grant every scriptural and theological claim as not only correct, but objectively true. So what am I here to do tonight? Well, I want to pit my methodology for moral decision-making against his own for the sake of brevity, and because I feel it's much more, we get much more accomplished on both sides through an open discussion than just us making assertions back and forth. I'm only going to describe my stance in very broad strokes, and I hope in the back and forth we got plenty of time to kind of thoroughly explore each other's sides. So in short, what I'll be arguing for is a methodology which both allows for individuals to make specific moral decisions and large-scale societies to establish a set of ethical laws and guidelines that protect individual rights while safeguarding humanity's continued existence. I'm going to refer to this from time to time, either maximum living or maximum human thriving, something along those lines. The specific goal of this methodology is to allow humanity to thrive at the highest possible level at any given time. Thrive in this context means we both protect humanity's ability to exist in the long term, let's say 1,000 years or more. And at the same time, and in my opinion, just as important, is that each person's quality of life is maximized as much as possible. Now, while quality of life can be measured in many ways, what I'm going to use, or the indexes that I will use for this, are the three that I feel are probably the most well vetted available, namely the Human Development Index, the Human Happiness Report, and the Better Life Index. I'll provide links to all of these reports on my channel when I mirror this discussion. I'll also make sure that Steve and Mr. Hovind also have those links if they wish to use them. Then they'll be available on their channels hopefully as well. The methodology I employ assesses the available data, and it's based primarily on a method structured around multi-criteria decision analysis modeling, which is one of the most well-vetted decision-making models in existence. Again, I'll provide links to that method so you can vet both my methods and my claims. So at the end of the day, what is all this fancified data gathering in mathematics? Well, what it boils down to is this. At the personal level, if you find yourself in a situation where you need to make a moral decision, all one need to do is ask themselves, how, if implemented by all of humanity as the norm, would that action affect humanity's ability to live and thrive? Now, granted, on the societal level, it becomes much more complicated and many more variables need to be taken into account in order to accurately assess the ramifications of the societal principles, which more than likely would encompass large groups of people, not to mention the norms enforced by the prescribed laws of that society. However, again, when we get to the nuts and bolts of it, the governing body basically needs to do the same thing. They're just going to ask themselves exactly the same question, except they're going to vet it in a lot more formalized and rigorous way, basically what I was talking about above. So in short, I need to do two things. One, I need to determine if the drawbacks that I find with Mr. Hovind's theologically based decision-making framework are so problematic as to render not only objective, but also subjective morality untenable. And secondarily, while I understand no decision-making model is going to be perfect, I hope to see how well my approach stands up against one which relies on the existence of an omni-God, and specifically the Christian God of Mr. Hovind's faith. Again, thanks everybody for viewing and supporting discussions like this. I honestly believe the only way to determine who has a more accurate belief system is to come together in an honest attempt to vet our beliefs in a forum like this. Also, anytime I have left over, I just say we dump that back into the back and forth, or maybe the Q&A from the audience.
Well, that was 5 minutes, actually.
Good. That was perfect.
Kent,
I'm done.
Yep, you're 5 minutes exactly. Kent, you're going to get 5 minutes as well. So go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. My name is Kent Hovind. I taught high school science and math 15 years. I've now been for nearly 30 years an evangelist teaching on science and the Bible. I believe the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate. I believe there's a creator of the universe and of mankind, and he set the rules down, like the Ten Commandments, for example. So if someone wants to believe there is no God, they, I think, are faced with the question of how do you decide right from wrong? How can there even be such a thing as right or wrong? It looks to me like it would obviously be going back to that particular individual, what's best for him. If, for instance, there is a large corporation and an individual is able to rob from them or steal from them, but it won't hurt the corporation much, well, then it would be perfectly fine. Because really things would be based on the individual's, outcome, best keeping.
Kent, if I could stop you real quick, there's a very loud, weird noise that's coming from your end, like a feedback.
I hear a little bit of it. Hey, Steve. I hear something buzzing back and forth.
It's gone now. Yeah, it's like a foghorn. It's very loud.
Well, according to evolution theory, things get better automatically. So maybe we should just leave it alone. I don't know what it was.
It's gone now. So
I see a couple of lights flashing, but that doesn't mean anything to me. So I think the idea that there is an overpowering, an all-wise creator is common sense, whether we see him or not. And I think that the Christian God, the God of the Bible specifically, is the only logical answer to what we observe and see and study and test. There had to be a creator. I use the illustration, if you're walking through the woods and you find a painting hanging on a tree, and you look around, there are no people, there are no footprints, but here's the painting hanging on a tree. It's logical to assume there was a painter. Whether you ever meet him or not kind of doesn't matter. The painting itself is proof of a painter, and the creation is proof of a creator. And as far as we know, everything is created for a reason. So what would the reason be for the creator creating this? And does he have any, or she, or it, the creator, have any rules or morals or standards to go by? And I take the position very strongly that the creator of the universe is the God of the Bible. And he left behind a book and tell us how he did it and why he did it, and that we're going to face him one day. I would be very curious I guess Ned is what he goes by. Does he think there will ever be a judgment day? So if it was completely possible to get by with, let's say, stealing $1,000 from the government, or 10,000 or 10 million, and nobody would ever find out, would that be right or wrong? And how do you determine right or wrong? Where's the standard that you measure this by? Is there such a thing? Is there an absolute standard, or is it all just relative to, your particular needs? So I think that the Christian God, and certainly the Bible, the Christian Bible, gives very strong, definite standards of right and wrong. Thou shalt not is mentioned in there quite a few times, whether you can get by with it or not. So I take the position without apology that the Bible is literally true, scientifically accurate, and not only is it correct about the creation, it's correct about the coming judgment. We're going to die and stand before this God one day, and every thought and every word is going to be played back. And we're going to be judged according to the things written in the books. And he's got a book about everything. So if a person does not believe in God and does not believe there's going to be a judgment one day, I don't see how they can have the same moral standard. Because, hey, if you can get by, especially stealing from a large corporation, well, why not? Well, it wouldn't hurt anybody, would be the thinking. So I take the position the Bible is true, and the moral standards have to come from that Bible.
Okay, thank you, Ken. All right, Ned. So you want to, like I said, I think both of you agreed, and we all agreed that you're going to have more of a back and forth. So, Ned, do you want to start this off, and then I just want to make sure that both of you have equal time to answer each other's questions, and there's a free-flowing dialogue, so it's not one-sided. So, if I think somebody's going to go over time, I will put it in the group chat. But if somebody can't see it, then I'll interject. Okay.
Okay, that sounds good, man.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, and like I said, Ken, I want to make sure that I'm, specifically talking about what you believe and not straw manning this at all. So
Okay.
A bunch of these are going to be kind of obvious, but just answer them yes or no. I just want to make sure that I'm not confusing you with anybody else. So we'll talk about God first. I'm assuming that you believe God is all powerful. In short, he can do anything as long as it's not logically impossible or outside of his own nature, correct?
The Bible reveals that God is able to do anything. He has put some limits on himself, like God cannot lie, he cannot sin. But those are limits he placed upon himself, apparently. That all I can do about God is tell you what's revealed in his word. I haven't got to meet him yet personally and shake his hand, but that's coming one day.
Okay. And then I guess next, he's maximally good, all loving, all caring, and that since he is all good, the plan that he has must result in the greatest of all goods, again, reflecting his nature. Does that make sense as well?
I would give that a qualified yes. God is good, but giving us freedom where we can hurt other people, and certainly we do, that we can't blame then on God. If God gave Adam and Eve freedom to choose and they chose wrong, you can't blame God for that. So you got to be careful how far you chase that rabbit. But go ahead.
Okay, no problem. And again, this is just kind of whatever. He's timeless in that, he has a plan for his creation, and he just, he knows the beginning from the end, just like Isaiah says. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. And as far as what we're viewing from our limited perspective, we can't know the mind of God. We can't know where his plan's going. We don't know, basically since we're limited in our perspective, again, since the way Isaiah put it, for the thoughts are not your thoughts, neither your ways my ways. And he's above us and all of that. Is that, again, do you agree with that?
Well, partially. I think we can know what God wants. That's why he gave us his word. Yes, we can know. He wrote it down clearly, what he wants and what he did and what he expects out of us. So I don't think I quite agree with that last statement. I think we can know the mind of God. He's told us what he wants us to do. Okay.
Okay. So kind of with that established, as far as, where we agree and, the little bit of disagreement, I don't think it's going to really come in. What I like to do is kind of, there's two thought experiments I like to run through with this. And what this is going to do is basically, there are two moral problems, if you will, that I want to kind of vet out. So the easiest way to do it is, if you can just imagine a woman in labor giving birth to a son or a daughter, doesn't matter. And immediately after birth, a person approaches the baby, announcing to everyone that due to the past crimes of the infant's father, that person is going to infect the baby with an illness that will cause that baby to fall sick and die within a week. Now, we always go to killing babies. I hate that on the moral side, but it's kind of where we're at. Would you say that the person that came in that did that committed an evil act?
If a person comes in and decides they're going to infect the baby with something that will kill it within a week because of the sins of the father, yes, I think for a person to make that decision would be wrong. Just given the facts that you've given us here, I don't know that that's the whole story, but okay.
Okay. All right. So, and then the second thought experiment is let's say that we're out in Alaska. I like being outdoors. I think you do too. And we're going out. We come across a draw in one of the valleys, and we got that beeping again. Ken, I don't know what that's.
Something is beeping, Steve. Look at this here.
It sounds like a phone on vibrate.
Yeah. Okay, take that. Yeah, okay. It is my phone sitting on the counter here. We'll take it away.
Nice. Okay.
Anyway.
All right, so we're back to Alaska. We come over this ridge line and we look down in the valley and we see, say, a group of Boy Scouts or a bunch of people down there in the valley. And us being smart, we know in Alaska we need to prepare, so we've got our rifles, we got everything with us that we would need to be out in the outback back there. And on the other side of the boys, let's say a couple hundred yards on the other side of that, we notice that there's a couple of bears and they're charging. And we know if we don't kill the boys, or we don't kill the bears, they're going to at least maul, if not kill the boys. So at that point, we've got a decision. We can either stand by passively and watch, or we can shoot the bears. I look to you as, because, you have this moral compass, you apparently better than mine, or at least you believe so. So I say, what should we do? What would you tell me at that point? Should we kill the bears or should we let the bears continue?
Oh, no question. You'd shoot the bears.
Okay.
If indeed that's the choice, shoot the bears or they're going to hurt the boys. And no question, human life is much more valuable than animal life.
Okay.
In my worldview.
Okay. So based on both of your answers on that, we'll go back to the first one with the person coming in and infecting the child. Do you happen to have your Bible with you or anywhere close that you can grab it real quick?
Oh, I do not. I have it in the computer. I could look it up, but tell me.
Don't worry about it. I've got it just in case. Okay. So both of these are based on the historical narrative out of the Bible. And I'm assuming, again, based on what we were doing before, that since I know you're a literalist, that if it happened to the Bible, we can take it on face value that in actuality, it did come to pass. Anything in the historical narrative, the historical text of the Bible was not meant as a parable or anything else, but it actually occurred. So, and I got both of these out of the historical text. So if we go to 2 Samuel 2:15, that was, and I'll go ahead and read it. And this is King James because I want to make sure again, I know you like King James.
Right.
And so what had happened is that David had impregnated Uriah's wife, which God told him not to do. And then, so the baby is just born. It describes the baby being born and whatever. And then 2 Samuel 12:15, what it reads is, and the Lord struck the child that Uriah's wife bore unto David, and it was very sick. David therefore besought God for the child. David fasted and went went in and lay upon the earth. And the elders of the house arose and went with him to arise him up from the earth, but he would not, neither would he eat bread with them. And then 18 specifically says, and it came to pass on the seventh day the child died. So in that passage, what that teaches me is that even killing children for the sake of the Father, since we've established that all of God's deeds must not only be good, but must be the ultimate of all good, that in that context, killing that baby was the best possible outcome given that situation. So would you agree with that, or do you have any pushback on that part so far?
Well, I don't think we know all the facts behind all of that. God knows everything, and I just have to trust him. I guess it goes back to the bigger question: am I going to doubt God until he proves himself right, or am I going to believe God until I find out the answer? My wife and I lost our first three children. I have 3 in heaven and 3 on earth, so this is rather personal with me. But I chose to, God, I trust you, I believe you, and I'll just have to wait and see one day. I don't know. As far as David and that baby, that's a great question. I don't know that anybody has got an answer to that. But if that's enough to cause a person to doubt the very existence of God?
No, Ken. I hope I'm not coloring this in the wrong way. I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm saying that we should do exactly, based on what the Bible says, we should do exactly what you're saying, and trust that since God felt the need to kill that baby for David, or for whatever, that was the ultimate good. I'm not trying to color God as evil here by any means. In fact, I'm doing the exact opposite. So I'm assuming we're kind of in agreement there. Does that make sense?
Well, if I understand your position, that I don't think we know all the deal why God did that or allowed that to happen.
Exactly.
Certainly David sinned horribly.
So since we don't know that, we can trust that God's actions there had to be the ultimate good. Because God.
Yes, I believe that.
Okay. All right, great. And then the second thought experiment, that speaks to 2 Kings 2:23 through 24, where we're talking about when God sent the 2 she-bears to maul the 42 boys, for calling him bald head and all of that. So what that does, at least what that teaches me is that if me and you are sitting on that ridge line and we see those bears coming, and since we don't know if potentially those bears were sent by God as he's done in the past, we can't make a decision there on if we should kill those bears or not, because we could be acting, or at least attempting to act in direct opposition to God, which and even as evil as it looks from our perspective, again, I'll refer to Isaiah 45:7. From the light I create the darkness, I make the peace, and I create evil. I, the Lord, do these things. So again, from our perspective, even though we may classify that as evil, because God did it, it can't be. Now, what that ends up, I guess, putting us in the position of is 2 things. Number one, since we can't know God's plan, we can never determine 100%, or even with, I would say, even probability, how we should act given a moral situation. Because again, if you would have came in on the 2nd Kings verse, you would have been let's say an archer back in those days and shot those bears. I'm assuming that would be acting in direct opposition of God's will, which I think is, if not the highest, one of the highest sins, and that it may be classified as blasphemy. So my question is, at this point, since we have determined that any action can be good if God uses it, and God specifically said he does use it, and we can't know what actions God is using, how can you make moral decisions at this point?
Well, had I been in the situation watching the bears attack the children, I don't know the mind of God, I would have shot at the bears. If it is indeed something from God, then God could have made me miss, or God could have sent more bears, or God could have made me not be available to shoot that day, be someplace else. So again, I trust him.
But again, as Jesus tells us, Kent, it's not how the action plays out. It's not if we're successful. So even though God would, of course, thwart our will, but when we, and I'll use what Jesus said about adultery. If we envision adultery, if we think about adultery, we have just as much committed the sin as if we actually committed the adultery. So us thinking about killing those bears is just as bad as if we killed the bears and stopped them, according to Jesus. So again, it's not about how effective we are. It's about the sin itself that makes it impossible for us to make any kind of moral decision.
So what are you suggesting then? That because we don't know if God sent the bears or not, we let the, I mean, if you see a car about to run over a child, do you just not do anything because you think it might be God's will? Is that what you're suggesting?
No, what I'm suggesting is given, and again, I'm sure you'll come back on this on my side, is I have a framework to make these decisions. I know, at least with a certain degree of relative certainty, where I should go. Now, granted, I can't be absolute because, number one, I don't believe in objective morality. But what I'm saying is that given the outside perspective that I have, my moral decision-making framework at least gives me a guideline, whereas yours, based on historical biblical text and God's own actions, it completely negates any ability on your part to make any decision, because there's no, and let's be clear on what I'm saying here. Number one, there's no such thing as good and evil anymore, because everything has to be good, because God, number one, is omnipotent, which means everything that is going on is part of his will and part of his plan. If he's all powerful and omnipotent, nothing could be going on that he does not approve of, period. Secondarily, if this is all part of his plan, the starving kids, the rapists, the bears killing the kids, all of that stuff, and this will bring about the greatest of all goods, us acting in opposition to that, by definition, means that we are attempting to bring about a lesser good, which, again, I think we may be able to even classify that as an evil act if we're acting in direct opposition of the greatest, most benevolent being of all time. So my question is not, we should stop acting. My question is again, how do you make decisions given these facts?
Well, you've got a really convoluted argument there, a little difficult to untangle. You said there's no such thing as good and evil. I think God gave man freedom of choice, including starting in the Garden of Eden. You don't have to serve God if you don't want to. You don't have to believe him. He gave us freedom of choice, just like you do with your children or your wife. You say, honey, you don't have to love me. You don't have to, or your children, you give freedom of choice. God gave us freedom of choice. We don't have to do anything. Now, there will be a test. There will be a judgment day. There has to be, or God is not moral. If God, the perfect God, said, okay, I have a heaven up here, and I want it to be perfect and flawless, and you can either live a perfect life, or if you sin, you can accept my payment for those sins, or I can't let you in. That's how I see it. God is not willing that any should perish. He wants everybody to come to repentance. But he can't just open the door and let everybody in, or we would turn heaven like it is here in Chicago in the streets. It would very quickly be chaos up there.
Well, but again, the problem is remember, this is not chaos. This is God's plan. God's will is being done as we speak. There's no way to thwart that. So
I think there is. No.
Okay.
He gave us the freedom of choice. You have your own will. You don't have to do anything. If you walk up and slap a baby right now, which you certainly are capable of doing, you're big enough and strong enough, I would assume, that doesn't mean that's God's will. That was your will. He gave you freedom of choice. You can't blame. You're trying to blame God for everything bad that happens.
No. Again, it's not bad. That's what I'm trying to get across.
That would be bad. No, that's what I'm trying to get across. There are things that are bad. There is evil in the world.
Okay, and so if that's the case, then explain to me how we can have an all-powerful being that sees and knows all, has set that in place, knows the beginning of the end, knows us before we were created, creates us for specific tasks here. How, number one, do we have free will other than just claiming it, when the omnipresent being that is all powerful not only can see what we're doing and change what we think. I mean, if nothing else, all we have to do is look at Exodus and what he did to Pharaoh, if we want to talk about mind control. God, as far as the Bible is concerned, I can't see, Kent, how you get around everything he does is for his will and for his plan, if not for his glory. Well, and for his glory. There's no way around us understanding that we can't thwart that will. If that is the case, everything has to be good. There's no such thing as evil because God's using it for his plan, which makes it good.
Well, yeah, I don't follow that logic at all, and I don't think that's correct. God gave us freedom of choice, free will. You can choose to do whatever you want. You can choose to not believe in him if you'd like. That's your choice. He doesn't want to force himself on anybody. You know, I'm 6'2", my wife is 5'3", I'm 200 pounds, she's 105. I could easily force my will on her, but I don't want to do that. God does not force his will on us. He does tell us what he wants, and he does offer us forgiveness when we sin. But if you don't want his forgiveness, if you want to go to hell, that's your business. But to say that everything that happens is God's will is not correct. God knows what's going to happen. God knows, and he's going to be the judge one day, but he's not. I use the illustration in my book I wrote of what on earth is about to happen, about the future, what the Bible teaches, how the world's going to end. If I watch a football game and videotape it, and at the last 2 seconds, the guy throws the Hail Mary pass, and if he catches it, they win. If he misses it, they lose. I video the game, and you come over and say, Ken, who won the game? I say, I'm not going to show you. Let's sit down here and watch it again. So while we're watching the game, we get to the last 2 seconds, and the ball's in the air, and I hit pause. Right at that moment, we have 3 different positions. I already have the knowledge of what's going to happen. I've seen it. That doesn't mean I'm controlling it. I can't change it, but I have knowledge. The guys on the ground have complete control, but no knowledge. They don't know if he's going to catch it yet or not. But they do have control. They're in control of the game, not me. And you have neither knowledge nor control. The fact that God knows the future and the fact that God gives us freedom of choice, he knows it all, but that he has chosen to let us make our own decisions. Now, that he will be judged one day and there will be a test, but it's not correct to say everything that happens is God's will. It's not God's will that any perish, but many are going to perish.
Okay, well, and again, I'm not getting that because, I mean, all we have to do is look at Genesis 50 and what Joseph said, fear not, for I am in the place of God, but as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it into good to bring to pass as this day to save many people. So again, even though he allowed that to happen to Joseph, it was used in order to bring about the greater good. And it would, in your analogy, I believe, is basically doesn't hold up because we're not talking, God is not a passive spectator of this world. God is the author of this world. So a better analogy would be if you wrote a book and how that book plays out, and you have constructed that book with a twist ending or something like that, that kind of surprises people in the end, and you've, I don't know, done some things that at first seem out of character or illogical, or you know, the characters that you're portraying here don't seem to be following their normal patterns. But in the end, it comes out. Since you are the creator of that, since you are the one who is putting this into I guess, action, you control all. And that is exactly what the Bible tells us about God. Now, as far as being punished in the end and choosing, you kind of brought this up in your opening, is that if someone was not to be punished or got away with, I think is the way you put it, with stealing money from a corporation or whatever, would that be okay? Would that be fine? Well, Kent, that's exactly what happens with your model of heaven. All I have to do is ask for repentance. All I have to do is get saved. And it doesn't matter what I've done in the past. I get away with all of it. If it is something as horrific as child molestation, or if it's something as benign as stealing a candy bar when I was 5, all of my sins are washed away. So effectively, what you've done is again, taken all the evil acts and negated them. They don't matter, which again is exactly what we see from God's message, in that he kills babies. He, sends bears to kill, even 20-year-olds, if you want to call it. He commits mass genocide. All of these things have to be good if God is doing them. And for you to try to employ free will to somehow get around that, to me, it's not, it just doesn't follow in that God has specifically not only shown that free will is not important, namely the taking away of one's free will through killing people or through Pharaoh, or, I mean, we can start going down the list of everybody that God controlled from a mental perspective. So, and as far as free will, I would really like to see as far as how you get around the problem of if I choose to sin, let's say, and then I get saved in the end, how that free will was paid for, how that transgression, so to speak, was paid for.
Well, we're way off topic here for one thing. Okay, I thought you were supposed to try to defend how evolution provides the best moral basis for decision making.
Well,
rather than attack the Bible, which you're welcome to do.
No.
This debate is supposed to be, what is your best moral basis for making decisions?
Right.
Do you believe in evolution?
I do, but number one, the evolution, as far as evolution goes, that doesn't play into morality other than where morality was derived from. So my decision making is more from a logical and mathematical standpoint than it is than biology and evolution. And we absolutely, I mean, what I understood from Steve is we were going to both get kind of 30 minutes to where I lead the questions for a half an hour and then you would lead the questions for the other half, which means in 30 minutes now you can grill me. Hopefully you will, because I definitely want to, I want to go through my decision-making model to see if it holds up. Then you can grill me on my decision-making model and we can kind of compare and contrast against the two. But again, I want to be as fair to you as I possibly can, Kent. So, I mean, when we've agreed to what God is and what God's plan is, and then for all of a sudden, well, no, we can thwart God's plan through our free will, I don't see how an all-powerful, omnipresent being, if he didn't want that to happen, if that was not part of his plan, how that could ever happen. I mean, go ahead.
Do you have children?
Absolutely.
Okay. Do they ever disappoint you or disobey you?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Okay. Are they still your children? You love them? Do you ever have to punish them?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
so if they have freedom of choice to disobey their own father, does that say something about you, your character?
Well,
you're trying to accuse God of being the source of evil.
Well, he specifically says he is, Kent. I mean, I read that passage. Isaiah, it's clear God created evil. Now, I mean, Isaiah 45:7. I form the light and create the darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do these things. That is King James verbatim.
Oh, you are correct. By creating light, you automatically create darkness. If you create light, there are going to be shadows or places where the light is not shining. And so it's the light that creates the darkness. Darkness actually, I guess, technically doesn't exist. It's only the absence of light, which is a whole other argument. But if God gives a standard of things he wants, this is the way he wants it to be done, and people choose to not do it that way, well, you have freedom of choice just like your kids have freedom of choice. However, there will be consequences. You tell them, clean up your room, and they can say, I don't want to clean up my room. Oh, okay. Well, then here are the consequences.
Okay, but Kent, number one, it's a non sequitur because I'm not omnipotent as far as as far as I know, I'm not. Definitely my kids know I'm not. I would assume you would agree with that. Uh-huh. And therefore, their choices are independent of my control. I cannot control them. I can react to their choices, but I can't control their choices. I did not, and I don't have a plan in place for them to follow like God apparently has based on what Scripture tells us. So again, we're comparing apples to oranges. If I am a non-omnipotent being and someone acts against my will, I have no real power to stop them. Whereas God not only has the power to stop them, but also has created them in such a way for them to play their role in his plan that must be done. We cannot thwart that plan. And if you can find some place in the Bible that says we can, I'd really be interested, because mean, you don't know my background. I went to Oral Roberts University. I've been doing this for well over 2.5 decades now, and I am fairly decent on the Bible, and I have found nothing that says that anyone could thwart God's will. In fact, the Bible says at least 24 times, from what I could tell, that no one can thwart his will.
Hold it. You say you've been doing this. What exactly do you mean doing this? What does that mean? Doing what?
Exploring my beliefs, seeing if I can somehow find God. And again, it's not just the Christian God. I've been looking everywhere in any faith that I can. Again, like I stated in the beginning, mine is I seek truth. That's all I care about. I mean, I will follow the evidence where it takes me. And if that means God, great, we'll go. 25 years of searching, I have not found anything that has convinced me of a God. So at this point, I have no decision of any God, period.
Any God at all. So how would you explain, do we exist? Are we here? Do we exist? Are we talking?
That's a great question. And the problem of hard solipsism would be very difficult to overcome. And the reason I say that is because you use the vernacular we there. If you would ask if I exist, yes, my existence is assured. I know my own existence. But do you exist? I have no idea. We could be anything from, I mean, we go to the old probably what you consider the silly arguments of brain in the vat and, all of that type of thing. The problem is there's no way around that problem as far as I can tell. The hard problem of solipsism has stood up the test of time. Do I believe we exist? Yes, I do, because it facilitates me living better than if I were to try to, I guess, go against that. How we exist, I don't know. I could be a brain in a vat. I could be part of a computer simulation. This could be real. It could be the way the Bible describes it. I don't know. I'm here to search and find out. That's what I'm here to do, or at least that's what I've been doing for 25 years. So that's when I say what I've been doing, that's what I mean by that.
Okay. Well, that's good. What so far have you come up with? How did the universe or the world or people or a grain of sand, was there a creator or did it create itself?
Again, that's a great question. My undergraduate's in physics, and from what physics tells us, the best explanation that fits most of the data, or the closest we can get, is Big Bang cosmology, or perhaps M theory. I'm an M theorist. I like M theory, even though me and Lawrence Krauss have gone nose to nose on this before, because he doesn't like string or M theory. But anyhow, I won't get into that. But again, now we are getting off the track. As far as where I think things came from, does that play into where my morality comes from? Unless we can demonstrate that there's a God, and even then, to me, that puts us very, very in a very difficult position to demonstrate how, with an omni God, that free will can exist. And again, Kent, I'm hoping that you can show me where I'm in error, but it seems that we keep going down these, I guess, side rabbit holes when I'm asking, in short, how do you make moral decisions knowing that every action is potentially good and you can't know which actions are good? You can't make a decision between what's good and evil because God uses evil.
Well, I guess I keep looking at the title to the debate, what provides the best moral basis for making decisions?
Right.
If there is no God, then is it wrong for a man to have sex with his dog? Tell me anything that you think is wrong, morally wrong. If I ask you to give me a list of 5 things that are wrong, is it wrong to murder your 2-year-old?
Okay, so
why? How are you making these decisions? I don't understand.
Okay, so just so Steve, I'm assuming, Steve, just to make sure we're on the same page, we're going to start switching over to my moral model and how I make decisions.
You got about 30. You asked your questions for about 30 minutes, so he can kind of grill you on your particular moral making decisions.
Okay, great. That sounds wonderful.
Okay,
good. Okay, so how do I make moral decisions? Basically, it boils down to this. What I'm looking for is, like I said before, I want to find a method, a a way of looking at the data that I have at hand, and I want to try to maximize not only the way I live, but the way humanity lives. So I have, and there's a lot more that goes into this, but again, to keep it simple, because we don't have a lot of time, the way that it works is I want to protect humanity's ability to thrive on the large scale. And not only from a personal perspective, but from a large perspective. So two hurdles I've got to overcome on every decision I make. Number one is protecting humanity's long-term survival, and which, well, we can get into that if you want to, is what you would have to do to that. There's basically three criteria that I see that would protect the the ability for humanity to just exist. And then the next thing is strives for quality of life. Now, what all of this boils down to is a simple question. Let's say that me and you are sitting on a board, and we're going to make a law that you brought up bestiality. So let's talk about bestiality. So should a person be able to engage in sex with his dog? Okay. All right. Well, let's figure this out. If humanity accepts that as the norm, so everybody can do that now, what negative consequences could that have, not only from a personal standpoint, but also from a societal standpoint? Well, we've got a couple. Number one, we know, based on many of the STDs that have been transmitted throughout history, that there are diseases that are isolated at one point to certain, in what you would consider to be a kind, so that we weren't aware of. Then someone does engage in either blood transfer, eating of the carcass, sexual encounters where we have fluids passing between those bodies. Does that make not only that individual, but the entire collective of humanity more susceptible to catching a disease that could potentially wipe out or at least harm large swaths of the population? Absolutely. There's no argument there. We can go back in history and see exactly where some of the things have come from, or maybe not exactly, but in general, how these diseases get transmitted. Some of them are beneficial, like cowpox. Then there's other ones that aren't so beneficial, like herpes. Well, maybe that's not horrible, but at the same time, it definitely diminishes quality of life. So from that standpoint, both of us can sit back and go, you know what? As much as we want to protect that person's free will to choose to have sex with that animal, we're going to have to choose to say, no, we're going to have to quell that and put some restrictions on it. Because again, as much as you want to talk about free will, anytime we place a restriction on another human being, in short, if we see, let's ramp it up a little bit and say that we're walking down and there's an alley and there's a woman being raped in the alley, I would assume that you, like me, would step in and stop that action from happening. Well, by definition, we are taking the rapist's free will. We are not allowing him his free will anymore. So free will is not, I said, for lack of a better term, it's not a sacred cow. We have to quell free will for the betterment of not only the individual, but as the collective species of humanity. So,
okay, slow down. When you say we, are you saying humanity has to vote on this, or you personally are going to step in and make the choice of where you're going to? What do you mean by we?
Exactly. What it's going to be is based on what we've seen throughout history. When humanity works as a collective, we are, by definition, we are a communal species. We are a herd. For to break it down and make it simple, herd animals work better. We have better chance of survival, of existence, of everything else when we work together. So absolutely, these moral questions need to be looked at from at least representative standpoint. And the longer technology goes, we may be able to get to the point where each and every one of us literally gets to vote on anything we choose to vote on. So we have the ultimate democracy at that point.
Okay, so if there was an inferior creature alive, that it would be okay for the majority, the we, to vote to eliminate that inferior or infected one for the good of the species. I see this leading directly down the path Adolf Hitler took of eliminating the mentally unfit.
Well,
for the good of the species.
Ken, I would highly caution you there. I've heard you speak on Adolf Hitler, and I mean, we can get into that discussion, but I mean, again, what I'm warning you, what I'm trying to warn you off of is that when we look at Adolf Hitler and your beliefs mirror Adolf Hitler's a whole lot more than mine do. And I don't want to call you out on that, but if you want to have another discussion, absolutely, we can discuss that and why I believe that. But as far as Adolf Hitler goes, again, why did Adolf Hitler do what he did? Well, let's look at history. Number one, Adolf Hitler believed that the Aryan race, the quote unquote pure race, it was divinely created. It did not in any way, shape, or form. And look at Mein Kampf. I know you said you've read it, which is a little surprising based on some of the things you've said in some of the other discussions. But Adolf Hitler was a staunch human creationist, at least, in that the Aryan species was absolutely divinely created. And the reason that he was trying to segment the species, so to speak, and specifically the Jewish, because he felt that they were, he felt it across the board. Any non-Aryan was muddying the water, so to speak, or diminishing the purity of the human race. Now, what's interesting is that's exactly what happened with Noah and the flood. The reason that Noah, and again, correct me, you know this hopefully as well, if not better than I do, one of the reasons that God had to cleanse the earth is because the Nephilim were, quote unquote, muddying the human genome or the human species. And that was one of the models that Hitler used. Not to mention, one of Adolf Hitler's biggest influences, as far as what he believed, was Martin Luther. And I know that you also really like Martin Luther. We can get into this and start talking about how anti-Semitic Martin Luther was, and how there is a very, very good correlate between Nazism and the book that Martin Luther wrote describing, it's called I can't find it now. The Jews and Their Lies. That's what he wrote. I just remembered now. The Jews and Their Lies are what Martin Luther wrote. And if you look at what he said Christians ought to do to the Jews, it mirrors in a lot of ways, almost, again, to the basis of Nazism, what Hitler was doing to the Jews. And we know from Mein Kampf, we know from his speeches, we know from his personal notes that one of his biggest influence was Martin Luther. So again, sorry, go ahead.
You're going to have to let at some point Kent respond to this.
Yeah, I think if we go back and listen to this tape, he's got like 80% of the time of him talking.
I know. So I'm going to turn over to you, Kent.
Okay. Well, I'd still like to know what is your basis then? How do you tell right from wrong? If it's what's good for the herd mentality, then what Hitler did is wonderful, because he would eliminate those that were crippled, those that were mentally deficient. He thinks, I'm helping Nazi Germany. And he had 55 million people at the time in his country who agreed with him. So certainly it was majority opinion, said, yes, this is a good thing to do. Let's eliminate the crippled. Let's eliminate the weak so we can strengthen the gene code. This is no different than a farmer wiping out the inferior cows, or the weaker. Don't let the weaker ones to breed and spread their genes to the next generation. So how do you decide what's best? What's your moral standard?
Okay, and you said that's a fair question. So would you agree that and I would agree with you, if we were, let's say, very limited in the contributions that we can make to humanity, if it was just a physical aspect, you're absolutely right. Then Hitler was, I guess, on the right side of things. But from humanity, we're multifaceted. Bring to the collective. I would assume that you would think that someone like a Stephen Hawking, even as quote unquote diseased and crippled as he is, his mind has still made humanity leaps and bounds better than anybody else. Adolf Hitler would have said that Einstein should have been gassed. The contribution he's made to society. So again, we have to, like I mentioned earlier, we have to take in many more variables than, let's just say, a farmer that is breeding for the most meat coming off a cow. We need to try to encompass all of humanity and everything that anybody can contribute. So that's how my model works, is that I try to encompass all of it and say, is this going to help humanity? Or let's say I'm assuming that you are in favor of the death penalty. We have a serial rapist, serial murderer, child molester. Maybe that person should either be quelled from the herd, so to speak, in either the death penalty, or at least subjugate them from society where they can no longer interact and at least breed.
So your basis of morals, I'm still trying to get the answer here, is you believe if it's bad for the herd, if it's good for the herd, that's how. So is there an absolute standard anywhere that we can look to? I mean, in the world, there are basically two standards of measurements of weights or lengths, the metric standard and the English standard. America's about the only country that uses the English standard, but and you taught physics and majored in physics, so you understand. There is a standard meter, a standard kilogram, a standard units. We have to have standards. Where is the standard? Like in the Bible, you have "thou shalt not commit adultery." That's God's standard. Do you believe it is okay to commit adultery if a person has superior intellect or superior genes? What would be wrong with them spreading that around and having as many children as possible with as many women as are available?
Okay.
Would that be wrong for them to do that?
So I think you had two questions there. I'll go in reverse and help me with the first one, because I'm probably going to remember by the time I get back, because of course I'm long-winded. Would it be okay for a person to commit adultery? Again, we run it through the kind of the machine and figure out what happens. If everyone was okay to commit adultery, if everyone said, we can do this and we're going to run rampant and everybody is going to whatever. Well, we know, again, as a species, that we, especially at certain times in our lives, we need at least one-on-one, if not a lot of moral support. So from that, if I know my wife is cheating on me, that's going to be detrimental to my health, my well-being. And if it was taken to the extreme where everyone was doing it, more than likely, we would have a problem with everyone not being able to connect, and the family, as far as being able to raise children, as being able to do that stuff, it's going to be potentially detrimental in the long run. So if we look at it from that perspective, there may be a negative aspect. So yeah, that's one of the main problems with allowing these things to run rampant, is that they end up with negative. I don't want to miss the first question, either Steve or Kent. Could you remind me of the first part of it?
Let me trace that rabbit just a little further. Then, so are you the one who gets to make the decision whether we should pursue this? What if somebody else decides? What if we get a Bill Clinton that says, well, yeah, I'm going to get every woman I can? Do you have the right to stop him even by force and say, no, you can't do that?
Again, Ken,
what about the Muslim culture where they thrive on rape? They encourage it. Are you going to try to physically stop them from raping your wife?
And again, Ken, it is going to be a collective. Again, we need to come to this as a democratic group, as a herd, and decide what is best for the herd. In short, if you think about this as I'm assuming you played on a sports team, baseball, football, whatever. Why is it good while you're on the baseball team for your team to win and the other team to lose? Because you're part of that collective, because you're part of that group, which by definition, the opposite of that is bad, according to your perspective. So if we can start to drop these us versus them and start to work as an entire, let's say a global community, now we can start to come together and address these issues of when you have women in servitude, basically, from the Muslim perspective. What does that do to the women? How does that affect them on a mental and a health standpoint? I think it's inarguable that it's negative. So as a collective, we more than likely would come to the agreement that, you know what, we need to do away with that. And again, as far as do we take away that person's free will? We do that every day, Kent. I think you probably know this better.
Oh, yeah, we do. Well, so if in a Muslim community, that particular herd, the herd of people in, say, Iran, has decided it's okay to subjugate the women in their herd, and they do. They call them just barely above animals, certainly not equal to men. So should we, in our herd in America, go over there and stop them by force from subjugating the women in their herd? Since that's their herd mentality, they've already voted. Yeah, we should do this. This is right.
Right, which is exactly, and that brings up a really good point. In that, what we ought to see based on absolute morality versus subjective morality, and to be pointed is if these laws were divinely inspired by an omnipotent being that is by all definition the very essence of good, once these laws were established, we should see them maintaining themselves throughout history. But even in the Bible, we don't see that. We see and I'm going to love this word, an evolution of morality over time. So again, ought we go stop that from our perspective? Probably. But in the long run, just as we've seen, we've moved away from all of what I would consider to be some of the more barbaric laws in the Bible, which you don't follow to this day. I'm assuming that if you caught me out cutting my grass on Sunday, you're not going to stone me to death, even though it specifically tells you in the Bible that when a man was picking up sticks to make a fire, the whole community was ordered by God to stone him. We see, and the other one that is clearly evolution or shows evolution is incest in the Bible. Incest in the Pentateuch, at least for the first few chapters of the Pentateuch, is not only condoned but rewarded. Everyone gets to keep propagating. Where later on there are specific laws, at least in part, that says no, we're not going to do that anymore. So, and what do we see on humanity? We see an evolution of morality to more and more inclusivity and more protection of everyone. That's what we would see if we were a communal species that had been evolving from cliques, from tribes into bigger and bigger communities.
Okay,
So
slow down here now. So
yeah.
suppose I think that teaching evolution theory in schools is detrimental to kids. The evolutionist thinks that what I teach is detrimental to kids. Should I then be allowed by force to stop them because I think it's detrimental, or should they be allowed by force to stop me from teaching creation because they think I'm damaging the herd and I think they're damaging the herd? We got a real conflict here.
Absolutely. And
Okay.
what we would do there is what we would try and do is, at least if we're going to try to base our decisions on rationality and base our decisions on, hopefully quote unquote truth, we're going to try and vet and see which one of the two, for lack of a better term, because both of them are not, but I'll use theory in here very loosely, see which theory best explains what the observable data shows. And at least until this point, evolution wins hands down, whereas creationism, it's nothing but a God of the gaps argument. So
Well,
which one?
I completely disagree with that. We could argue that if you like.
No, and again, my end is not evolution, so that's why I don't want to get into that. But from what I see, but again, it should go back to what we can demonstrate as being most likely if we're going to teach our children. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Can we demonstrate that it's most likely that if you crossbreed dogs, you're going to get a dog? That's all we've observed. So why are we teaching kids in school that dogs came from rocks 4.6 billion years ago? That's not likely. That's not science. It's not observable. I think that should be stopped. I think that's detrimental to the kids. It's counterproductive to science. Dogs do not come from rocks, but that's what the books teach.
And again, saying that when all we get is dogs from dogs is
It's science. That is science. That's common sense.
I'm trying to quell this as much as I can, but it's not evolution. It's a complete misunderstanding of what evolution teaches. In the same way that, coming from rocks, which at the very base assertion, yes, is true. If you're going to consider elements such as We get down to the molecular level. Yes, everything is rocks. Everything is going to be from that level. But again, that does not, you're conflating abiogenesis, which has nothing to do with evolution, and then you're trying to conflate macroevolution with microevolution, which again, you have to delineate the two. So when the kids are taught this, they understand the difference. By just conflating all that together, Kent, you're giving a very, let's say, non-accurate depiction of evolution. It does not reflect evolutionary theory, even 100 years ago, let alone what it's evolved to be.
Well, I have quotes in front of me from Talk Origins 2016, from Berkeley University 2017. I could read all the quotes if you'd like.
Can we assume, hang on, because you're getting off, both of you guys getting off topic. Can we assume for arguendo that let's just grant Kent that. Let's just say whatever he says about evolution is true. We both would probably agree that he's not correct on this. But let's grant for the argument that he's correct. How does that relate to morality? Because I think it's not exactly to do with morality.
Okay, my question was, if the books do, this textbooks do teach, we came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, got rained on, turned into soup, and the soup came alive, and I could spend an hour reading you all the quotes from the modern textbooks if you'd like. So if I think that is detrimental to kids and is going to harm society, should I, by force, stop people from teaching that? By the same token, if I teach we came from God, and that God wrote a book and told us what to do, and the evolutionist thinks that is bad for kids to learn, should they by force stop me from teaching what I believe? Who is making this decision here? You keep saying we. How did you get to be part of the we? Am I part of the we?
Well, number one, Ken, no one's stopping you. I mean, I don't know why you're saying you're being stopped. I mean, you admit, and again, I mean, I guess this could go into the morality discussion too. You claim to be a teacher of 15 years in high school. So can you tell me which high school allowed you to teach this? Or better yet, quelled you and didn't allow you to teach it?
I speak in scores of schools to this day. I speak in public schools, private schools. I think students should see both sides. If they're shown both sides, they always choose creation. I say always with a tongue in cheek, nearly always. If presented both views, it's obvious there is a creator. Okay. Presented the evidence, it's obvious this earth cannot be billions of years old if kids see the evidence.
Okay.
But anyway, my point is, would you want to, if I was going into public schools every day, teaching creation, teaching God created the world, would you think that I should be stopped somehow by force?
Not from a theological perspective, but from a science perspective, it should be noted that your beliefs and again, I don't want to get too pointed on this because I'm not trying to be combative, but your qualifications, both from, because from what I've seen, I don't see any, again, I'm not trying to be combative here. I want to show you where my thinking process is coming from.
That's what I'm asking for.
Right. I've never seen any accredited school or any of your teaching credentials that would allow you to actually take on a teaching position anywhere outside of a church, including your PhD, which I definitely have problems with on that. And that's why I call you Mr. But I guess the thing is that if you're going to walk into a school, number one, I would mandate, if it was my school, you could not use the moniker of teacher because you don't have the credentials to do it, and you absolutely cannot use a PhD or a doctor. And the reason being is again, you don't have the credentials that allow you to use that. And we both know that when you use that in every debate, you are trying to color yourself. When someone thinks of a high school teacher, they think of, especially a science or math teacher, of someone who at the very minimum holds a undergraduate in mathematics or science. You hold neither of. And in this case, most schools will require a master's degree if you're going to be in mathematics in high school or science. And then as far as your PhD goes, they assume that you would go to a school like the letters that I've got behind my name and my wife's name, we earned through years of rigor. years of publication, which is not indicative of who you are. So yes, I would quell you. So
Right,
let
Ned.
me finish that.
You gotta let Kent.
Okay, I got two more words. So yes, Kent, I would quell you in teaching that, but only from the perspective of the monikers that you use. No, I'd let you walk in the school.
Okay, so you would quell me. You would physically, by force, stop me from saying I have a doctorate degree or that I'm a teacher. What do you mean quell me? How are you going to do this?
Well, if you're going to insist on using those words, I'm not going to allow you in my school. I have that right as an administrator of the school.
Well, suppose an administrator of a school does allow me to come in, which they do, and say, yes, we'd like you to teach about dinosaurs or creation. And suppose I teach dinosaurs always lived with man. They were just big reptiles, and they called them dragons or some other name, because the word dinosaur wasn't made up till 1841. But these animals always lived with man. There could be a few still around today, like Loch Ness Monster kind of stuff. I don't know. I've never seen one. But there certainly have been tens of thousands of sightings that appear to be dinosaur-like creatures alive today. If I taught that, and I do, you would quell me. You would try to physically stop me from doing that in a public school. If it's public, I mean, is it really public?
Again, what does our Constitution, what does our agreed upon laws say about separation of church and state?
Well, if we're going to be separate, then we certainly shouldn't teach evolution, because nobody's ever seen a dog produce a non-dog. That's a religion. Here we have a religion. That's a religious belief.
Did we lose Kent? Kent, I think you muted yourself.
Yeah, I think you muted yourself, Kent.
I don't know what happened. Is that back on?
Yeah, you're back on now.
Okay.
Can I ask a qualifying question? Because I think this is important. When you say that you've taught, when you go to the schools and they invite you, is this for like an after-school curriculum thing, or there's just a one-time seminar, or have you ever had a complete course that you've taught over a period of time that's accredited to college students?
Have I ever? I mean, are you asking, do I get invited to schools to teach a complete course? No, I get invited as a guest speaker.
When you say the word teaching for qualification or qualifying purposes for the word teaching, are you just going in for invited purposes to talk about creation science, or have you ever had an actual course that is accredited where you have students, 12 to 30 students that are getting college coursework accreditation as in a college or university or
high school?
Or high school.
Well, I guess we'd have to discuss accreditation. Up until there was no such thing as accreditation in the early days. Harvard, Princeton, and Yale were non-accredited for decades. What is accredited by who? For what? That's a real nebulous term. What does accredited mean?
No, I'm sorry, Ken. It's not. There's a very, very structured and stringent criteria for accreditation, and it's very easy to find.
So if a person goes to school 16 years and comes out believing they came from a rock, which is what they come up believing generally. They come up slowly, of course. They came from the rock slowly over billions of years, not quickly. It happened slowly, but they came from a rock. Even though this is never observed, nobody has ever seen a dog produce a non-dog, but they believe a dog came from a rock. Because they went to a school that has accreditation, they are now qualified to teach all the kids that we came from a rock. That offends me.
Well, Kent, the first thing, again, it seems you're somewhat, and again, I really didn't want to get down this road, but if a dog ever produced a non-dog, that would disprove evolution, not prove it.
Did dogs come from something? I'll give you all the time you want. Billions of years ago, millions of years ago. Did dogs come from something that was non-dog?
Well, okay.
Yes or no? It's a real simple question.
You guys are losing the thread again. Negation, I'm going to ask you a direct question for qualifying purposes.
Yeah.
Does evolution teach that dog populations will eventually produce non-dog populations in a monophyletic clade?
I would say yes, but again, I've got to qualify that non-dog, because, I mean, as much as we want to sit here and say non-dog, it's how far we go back, in the same way that a chicken is a dinosaur. So did dinosaurs create chickens? Yes. Are chickens dinosaurs? Yes. So is it a non-dinosaur? No. So again, now could a chicken breed with a Tyrannosaurus? No. So we have a separation of species. And again, this is not my strong point. And I really would like to get back to evolution. I mean, not evolution, but away from evolution and get back into morality, which is what we were agreed to come and talk about.
And also, I'm not sure if I even got an answer for Kent's. Let's assume that there are accredited college out there. Has there ever been an accredited college that you've taught an entire coursework, a summer course or a 3.0 worth course that people got any kind of accreditation from?
Are you asking me?
Yes, sir.
No, I have taught courses in Christian colleges. I have taught individual classes and done many debates at secular colleges.
Okay.
But I've never taught a complete.
So it wasn't on anybody's transcript?
No.
Okay.
Now, if it was, would that offend Ned? Would he want that removed from their transcript and want that person to be disqualified because they learned from an unlearned fellow like me?
If, depending on what it was qualified as, if it got him or her a, let's say, a Bachelor of Science degree, and that was considered a science course, I would absolutely have the college looked at as far, or even a high school looked at as far as what they're teaching, and does it reflect the curriculum that has been put forth for accreditation. As far as if you can teach it from, let's say, a religious standpoint, you have all the right in the world to teach that. Absolutely.
But it's okay in a science course to teach the kids that dinosaurs turned into chickens and chickens are dinosaurs. Have you stop and think about that just for a second? Chickens are dinosaurs. You really believe that?
Kent, and again, I'm not trying to be combative, but your inability to understand does not make it wrong. All of the evidence absolutely points in that direction. Everything that we have on multiple levels, every science keeps feeding back into this kind of overarching and an umbrella of evolution. Yes, it feeds on itself. It brings back into it, and that's what the data shows. And again, I'm not here.
That's what it shows to you.
Hang on, because you guys are both, again, getting off topic. How does this affect your morality argument, Ned? If evolution is false, or if it's true, how does it differ your argument for morality?
It does not, in any way, shape, or form.
Either way, whether evolution is true or evolution is false, what you're arguing is independent of that. Is that what you're saying?
And yeah, I mean, it would not affect me if we found a rabbit in the Precambrian tomorrow. My evolutionary model, my morality model, would not be affected by evolution at all. I would still have the same criteria, that the mathematics would be the same. Everything is exactly the same as it is today.
And how would it affect your model? Because this is about Q&A time, because we do have some questions from the audience, and this one question is very similar to this. But how would it affect your morality system, Kent, if you found out evolution is true? How would it change your morals?
Well, I think you'd have to define evolution. I think microevolution is certainly true. God designed the animals to produce a variety of offspring. So some survive in cold weather, some in warm weather. Some have long hair, short hair. God gave a gene code that is incredible and allows for variations. So you'd have to define what you mean. If it could be proven scientifically that the entire evolution theory was true, including Big Bang, cosmic evolution, etc., that would certainly discredit the Bible. The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. And so if it could be proven that they don't bring forth after their kind, that pine trees and rabbits are related, then that would discredit the Bible. Now, would it affect my morality? I guess I could still choose to live any way I wanted to live. But I try to choose my basis for deciding right and wrong based on what the Bible teaches. That is the foundation, I hope, anyway, for my moral choices. I want to please the God of the universe that created me. But I guess I could be an atheist and still live an ethical life. I don't know about moral. Maybe ethics would be a better word. But okay.
Let me ask it this way. This is actually from an audience member. Hypothetically, assume there is no God and never has been. Assume that all the people who believe in him are simply mistaken. What changes? Do you assert that society would collapse? Or would there be, because there's been many societies that have had no such God belief, and they have workable moral frameworks?
Well, they have to enforce their moral frameworks by force. Take a look at the Soviet Union or communist China or communist North Korea. North Korea is a classic example right now that we're, as much as we know about it. What if a person disagrees with the leadership there? Well, they disappear, or they get horrible beatings, or they get sent to prison for 20 years. It's unbelievable what happens because you don't dare question the leader. So I think that we see a classic example of what evolution does in a situation like North Korea. You have to enforce your standards on everybody with threats of death or imprisonment or confiscation of goods. Yeah, I think we've seen examples like in communist China or communist Russia, where we have horrible things happen in the name of enforcing the good. Whereas the leaders of this country back to 225 years ago said a republic will only work for a moral people based on, and ours was based on Christianity. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator with certain rights. Rights come from the creator. Whereas in a democracy, which is a horrible form of government, rights come from the majority. And the majority could actually vote to execute the minority if they wanted. In a pure democracy, that could happen. Democracies are evil, terrible governments. It's a republic where the law is supreme, not the majority. But what I hear Ned saying is that the majority is really supreme. They make the decisions of right and wrong. And that's evil. No, there has to be an absolute standard someplace. Thus saith the Lord, in my opinion. And I've got that.
Same question to you, Ned. If there was a society that did not have gods, how would you think morality would be affected?
Well, we see that. I mean, all we have to do is look at most of the westernized world, namely, for the most part, we look at the Scandinavian countries. We look at the more a society moves away from religion, the more inclusive and the more, again, if we go back and we use the measures that I advocate for at the beginning of this, the happiness quotient, all the stuff that goes into that, we see that those countries have the best quality of life. Their longevity goes up and people are the happiest. Where we see the worst atrocities are where we have the most authoritative states, and that does include ones that are ruled by theocracies. Theocracies, as much as Kent wants to say that democracy is horrific and evil, well, if we look at the animal kingdom as our model, we see that collective groups happen to be the most altruistic. In fact, the most altruistic life form that we know of is the honeybee. They will allow every one of their selves to be sacrificed for the queen, which from evolutionary standpoints makes perfect sense because the queen's the only one that can carry on the genetic code. Whereas when we get to the other end of the spectrum, namely, let's talk about, Kemp likes to talk about the Islamic State. That is a pure theocracy. When we get there, what happens? I think it's self-evident. We don't even have to discuss that. I'm done there.
All right.
Well, that depends on what. I think they have a very different God than we do. Certainly not the God of the Bible in the Muslim world.
Careful, Kent.
No,
let's go to the next question because this actually leads into the next question I'm going to ask both of you. And I don't know the scripture very well, so please forgive me. But according to Romans 2, it basically says that whether you're Christian, an atheist, Jew, Hindu, Muslim, Buddhist, you have something called a conscience. And the conscience is what tells you what to do. If that's the case, then is it that the bottom line that the Bible tells us that the best methodology for making moral decisions is the conscience?
Who was that directed at?
Either one for Kent. That's from Fiona.
Okay. Well, a conscience, of course, can be what you believe and think down deep is right and wrong is greatly molded by what your parents taught you, what society teaches you. In the Palestinian world, their kids are taught from the time they're born to hate the Jews, to shoot them if you get a chance, and their kindergartners will practice shooting and beheading, and they're just this is trained into them. So their conscience would be very different than my conscience, where my mom would yell at me, if I didn't do certain things, or would teach me to do the right things. And so I think even the conscience can be molded and shaped. So you have to be very careful with that. Is there a standard above your conscience? I would say yes. There has to be an absolute standard. Hitler really thought he was doing the right thing. His conscience was clear. He was excited about killing people that were inferior because he was helping humanity. I'm sure the leader of North Korea really thinks he's doing a wonderful thing by killing Christians, getting rid of them. They don't want that in their society. They really think that most people, Stalin thought he was doing a good thing. He killed probably 60 million people. Way outshine Hitler.
So you're saying an atheist can't have a conscience and still have morals then?
Or conscience, the word con means with, and science means knowledge. So a conscience, you're with knowledge. It depends on what you fed into that. What did you program into this computer? So I think some people have a very bad stuff programmed into their computer.
Okay, same question to you, Ned. Can you have just a conscience and not have a God involved in that to make moral decisions?
Yeah, I mean, we see it every day again. Not only from the human species, but we see it depending on how far you want to stretch that definition of conscience to other life forms that show at least a degree of sentience, all the way from dolphins to the great apes down to, depending on how far you want to stretch it, all the way down to insects. But I think it's interesting that, Kent again wants to go to the Nazi regime and say that, Hitler thought he was doing a good. Absolutely, he thought he was doing good. Based on what? Based on his belief that his people were divine. His people were of God, and because of that, he had the right to persecute, kill, torture others that weren't, quote unquote, of that divine nature. So as much as he wants to argue for a theocracy, every time we see a theocracy in action, including Hitler and Pol Pot, he is a god in the eyes of those people. And what Stalin did was not in the name of atheism; it was in the name of the authoritative. Again, you were saying that the laws of the states should supersede the laws or the communal agreed upon prescribed laws from a collective group, i.e. what we have in America. That is exactly what's going on in communism, is that the state laws supersede everyone's rights. So again, it's interesting to me that on one hand, Kent will argue against all this stuff at the same time where his Bible and his own words support exactly what he's arguing against.
Well, curious, in the community or the collective or the state of lions, they think it's perfectly fine to grab the zebra baby and rip its guts out and eat it. Now, to the zebra, that does not seem perfectly fine. They don't want the lion to grab their baby and rip the guts out and eat it. So, but if the lions got together and voted, is it okay to kill the zebras? They would all vote, of course it is. So the idea of getting a collective to decide right and wrong, which is, I think, the purpose of this debate, how do we decide right and wrong?
That's exactly.
Where's the moral basis? So the lion collective has already decided, sure, it's okay to kill the zebras.
And we have decided that it's okay to kill a myriad of species, cattle, chickens, everything else, because we are not of that group. Again, I refer you back to playing on a sports team. Why is it okay for the lions to kill the zebras? Because the zebras are not of that lion team, so to speak. And even, I don't know if you knew this, but this might help you in the future, is that the lions, if an alpha male takes over the pride, that alpha male will kill all of the cubs of the previous.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
Right. And again, is that right? Those cubs are not of his clique, are not of his bloodline. So as far as that goes, they're not on, quote unquote, the same team. So him winning allows him to do that. All of these rules are set within each group, and everything that we do from a moral perspective has to have a goal. If your goal is to follow God and what the Bible says, I argue, which I'm still waiting for an answer, how you can know what that goal is, because everything is permissible. Everything is part of God's plan, as God demonstrates himself when he commits what, I'm not arguing that this is an atrocity, but from what an outside perspective, it would look like atrocious.
So the title here is, what provides the best moral basis? So you're saying that the collective herd decides what is best. So if a collective herd like lions decides it's okay to eat the zebra, then it's okay. If a collective herd like Nazi Germany decides it's okay to kill the Jews, then it must be okay, because that's what the collective herd decided, just like the lions killing the zebras.
No,
I'm just trying to understand, what is the basis of your morals? That's
okay. And again, let me delineate this. In your opinion, are Jews humans?
Yes.
Are Nazis humans?
Yes.
So killing those Jews would work against the collective interest of humanity.
Not if one group of humans, like the Nazis, thought that the other group of humans, like the Jews, are inferior and they're saving the species. And it was evolution that motivated Hitler and Stalin.
Okay, again, I really would like to come back and talk to you on this, because there is nothing that Hitler has ever said. I'm not getting into that because that's historical, and we can do a whole other debate. He said the exact opposite of that. But again,
Well,
I'm not going to get into it. I would highly recommend the audience and your viewers in particular, go look up, read Mein Kampf, go look up and try and find any supporting evidence that Hitler was in any way, shape, or form thought that his quote unquote master race was not divinely created.
That actually it could be a whole different topic.
That's exactly why I said let's not get into that.
Kind of into the self. Now we are getting close to the 90-minute mark. I know Kent likes to keep these things on time. However, I do have a couple more questions I would love to ask if he wants to stick around. If he has a time crunch, then we can start with closing arguments and maybe pick it up somewhere else. This is an in-depth discussion. Morality is not something you solve overnight. So I understand that this is not going to be resolved in one type of debate. So if there wants to have a part 2, I'm all for that. I would like to have some more questions answered, but it is a time crunch to Kent because we are running a little bit late. So
yeah, let's go ahead to questions. I do have a time crunch here, so go ahead with the questions.
This particular question is kind of in line with what I think Ned's argument is. It has to do with how you deal with Eupheril's lemma. And basically, if atrocities within the Bible are done for the greater good, how can you evaluate any action as good or evil without omniscience to know if they netted a greater good? And I think that is kind of what you're going for. Do you shoot the bear before the bear kills the children? And if you do so, are you acting in a contrary way to God's will? And are you committing a sin by doing so?
You're asking me?
Yes, sir.
I guess I would have no way of knowing if God sent the bears to kill the children. I would shoot the bear. If it was God's will, he could overpower that and make me miss or send another bear. But certainly, from all I can see, I would have to go based on what I can see. I think it would be my duty to protect these children. And I would shoot the bear, no question. Now, does that tie into, like, if some certain religion wants to come in and rape your children and your wife? Do you do something to stop them? Absolutely. You do whatever is necessary to stop them. Now, they think they're doing God's will. That's what many wars are started that way. Both sides think God's on their side. That's no question. That's been the history of humanity. Both claiming they're doing God's will. So I think to answer your question, no, I would shoot the bear or try. And like the Marines have to say, it's God's job to judge Saddam Hussein. It's our job to arrange the meeting. And I like that philosophy.
What about you, Ned, as far as your argument? I think that kind of plays into your argument.
Well, I mean, again, I think it is exactly my argument, and I'm a little disappointed that instead of kind of addressing that, Kent's wanting to avoid the sin itself and say that he couldn't perform the act. We're not arguing. Again, you cannot thwart an omnipotent being's will. So yeah, you may not be able to do it, but again, I mean, we can look at, Ezekiel 14:13, if nothing else, tells us that, if we act against God, if we try to act against God, that is a sin in and of itself, no matter what the outcome of that action is. Our thought, our attempt to do that is sinful. So if you're trying to reflect what the Bible says, and as you said earlier, you're trying to base your morality on what the Bible tells us to do, I still am waiting for how you make moral decisions, because there's nothing of substance behind it other than, well, it feels right. Well, that's the same thing a pedophile will say about raping a kid. It feels right.
Well, don't accuse me of that. No, I did answer your question. I try to base my moral decisions based on what does God tell us. 1 Corinthians 10 in verse 6 and 11 tells us that all the stories in the Bible are given for our examples or ensamples. I read the Bible a lot. I've read it many, many times cover to cover, and I think I can stand my own again in a debate on the topic with most folks. And so I think that kind of becomes subconscious, the way my thinking, I want it to be. subconsciously based, where all of my decisions come from, thus saith the Lord. When it comes to, for instance, murder, it's very clearly spelled out. Now, as far as killing in self-defense, if someone comes into your house to kill your family, shoot them hard, fast, and often, right between the eyes, no question. So there are different decisions that we can make. It's already predetermined based upon what God has told us to do. Most of the decisions in life are pretty simple and clear cut. Some are not quite so simple and clear cut. But I think as a general rule, most of them can be decided relatively quickly based on thus saith the Lord, either by the Lord's direct command or by an illustration or an example.
Okay, then let's do this. What saith the Lord about incest?
Well, after the book of Leviticus, in the early part of humanity, I mean, Adam married his own rib. He had to. The first 2,500 years of human history, when the population was growing, Cain or Abel or Seth had to marry sisters, and there was no problem with it. It wasn't wrong. Later, God put restrictions down and said, now, and this would be 2,500 years after the flood, after the creation, God said you cannot marry sisters anymore. But there are still cultures that do that. Charles Darwin married his own first cousin, hoping to have superior children. So that was back in, 1840 or whenever he got married. So there are people today, cultures today, that marry close, marry sisters and nieces and aunts. It happens all the time.
I'm
saying it's wrong today on biblical standards. As of about the time of Moses, God said, now it's wrong. There wasn't an evolution of the standard. That was a necessity based upon the human gene code degrading, I think.
Okay, so I have two, I guess, problems with that. Number one, the only problems we have are going to be in Deuteronomy 27, 22, and 20, 11 through 12. That's the only one that gives us that, and they're very specific in what we can and can't do as far as what union, and it's specific with father and daughter. Everything else is apparently good to go, sisters and all of that. Now, the other problem is you want to say that we've got objective morality. Well, if we've got objective morality, that makes absolutely no sense, in that at one point it was okay. And again, as much as you want to try and take it back to just the Adam and Eve story, it's not. What happened after Sodom and Gomorrah? Did God penalize those two daughters for getting their dad drunk and sleeping with him? No, he bestowed children on them, and apparently good children. I mean, we can sit here and go through the entire deal. So we've got two problems.
Let's take it one at a time then.
Okay, go ahead.
Lot's daughters got him drunk, got pregnant by their own father, and produced the Ammonites and Moabites, which were trouble for humanity and for that region ever since, and still are to this day. The descendants of those daughters are, causing trouble over there.
Okay,
just look up Moab or Ammon in the Bible. That's what Lot's daughters did was wrong. It was evil. It was wicked. God didn't bless them with children. They got pregnant. That's a biological thing. People get pregnant all the time. It's not God's will for everyone. You can't blame God for every pregnancy.
No, I'm not. But I am saying that an omnipotent being could absolutely, not only after the fact, make them infertile. He could have turned them into a pillar of stone like he did to Lot's wife, which all she did was transgress and look behind her. The entire city of Sodom and Gomorrah, or cities, he completely decimated. So to say that God didn't support this is really starting to stretch things a little bit, Kent, because if he didn't, why would he give them not only children, but allow them to become the parents of entire civilizations that, as you admitted, exist to this day?
Well, the final score isn't in yet. God is going to judge everything. There will be a final judgment. Every word man has spoken, every thought they ever thought, every deed they ever did will be judged. If a person commits a crime and the policeman catches him 5 minutes later, we would say, oh, that's fine. What if he catches him 5 weeks later, or 5 months later, or 5 years later, or 500 years later, or 5,000 years later? It's all going to be straightened out, Ned. God has a record of everything. Nobody gets by with anything. It's not over yet. The fat lady didn't sing yet.
Unless you're saved, and then he welcomes you into the ultimate reward with open arms with no penalty whatsoever.
Oh no, that my penalty certainly, but mine was paid for by somebody else. Jesus Christ paid for my penalty.
So that's exactly my point, is that any of the sins that you've committed, or any of the sins that anyone that is saved committed, you get away with it, Kent, by allowing another to pay for your sins. So again, it would be the same thing as I go out and create and murder people, but my son goes to jail for me, and you would call that justice, apparently.
Well, we'll have to do this another time. I have a time crunch here, but this is, we're way over time here. This is, I think, a great discussion, and thank you so much for doing this. We will die one day. I think you'll agree with that. And as long as you're happy with your position and you think you're fine, I guess you got nothing to worry about.
Well, Kent, I've got a take on that too, in that my belief is that we live in a computer construct, and the creator of the construct weeds us out based on our ability to discern what is real and what is not. So in my world, I feel sorry for you because you're choosing to ignore all the data, and you'll be discarded on the scrap heap of history as nothing more than excess code, where I'll get to move on to the next level. So sorry,
Wow.
Kent.
Okay. What a way to look at life. All right. Well, thank you so much, fellas.
Thank you, Ned. Thank you, Kent, for the debate. We are going to have an after show. It's going to be probably about a half hour from now, give or take. There are a few special guests I'm trying to invite. If you want to listen to this debate on Ned's channel, he's going to mirror it, and also on Ken's channel, which is Ken Hovind Official. Links are in the video description. And I want to thank both my guests for this debate. It was a great topic. Again, nothing that we can get resolved in one sitting, but maybe we'll continue this in part two. I will point out that there will be another debate Kent is we'll be having with King Crocoduck. I believe it's on the August 11th. And with that, I want to thank my viewers and my live chat, the super chats, and everything else, and everybody from the Great Debate community. And we'll see you in about an hour or a half hour. Thanks, guys.